I'll never forget the rainy night I first stumbled upon Ravenswood Manor. It was as if the stormy weather had an eerie aura of its own, one that seemed to cling to every brick and stone of the decaying mansion. My friends and I had always been drawn to the abandoned places in our town, and Ravenswood Manor was the latest obsession. We had heard whispers about its dark past, the tragedies, the scandals, and the unexplained occurrences. But nothing could have prepared us for the feeling that settled over me as we stepped onto its crumbling driveway. The mansion loomed before us, its tall spires reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The rain poured down around us, drumming a relentless beat on the pavement. It was as if the night itself was trying to warn us away. But I had always been fascinated by the unknown, and Ravenswood Manor represented the ultimate mystery. We exchanged nervous glances, our hearts pounding in unison, before pushing open the creaking front gate. As we made our way up the overgrown path, the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches tangling together like skeletal fingers. The wind howled through the empty halls, sending shivers down my spine. We had brought flashlights and cameras, but nothing could have prepared us for what awaited us inside. The mansion's facade was a labyrinth of turrets and towers, each one seeming to whisper secrets in the wind. I felt a shiver run down my spine as we approached the entrance, a massive wooden door with iron hinges that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. The rain pounded against it like 1,000 tiny drums, making me wonder if we were truly alone in the world. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, my eyes adjusting slowly to the darkness within. The air was thick with dust and decay, and I could feel the weight of centuries bearing down upon us. My friends followed close behind, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of our flashlights. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls like a death knell. As we ventured deeper into the mansion, I began to notice strange symbols etched into the walls, ancient runes that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. My skin crawled as I realized we were not alone in this place. Something was watching us from the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. We explored room after room, each one filled with relics of a bygone era. But it wasn't until we stumbled upon the grand ballroom that I truly felt like I had entered a world beyond our own. The chandelier above the dance floor seemed to mock us, its crystals reflecting the flickering light of our flashlights like cold, dead eyes. It was then that I heard the whisper, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to carry on the wind. "Welcome home," it said. "You shouldn't be here." As I stood frozen in the grand ballroom, the whisper seemed to echo off the walls, sending shivers down my spine. My friends were transfixed, their eyes fixed on me as if waiting for some sort of explanation. But I knew no words could justify our presence here. We had broken the unspoken rule of Ravenswood Manor. We had come without permission. The whisper seemed to grow louder, more urgent, and I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin. Suddenly, the chandelier above us began to sway, its crystals rotating in a hypnotic rhythm. My friends gasped as one, their faces pale with fear. And then, in an instant, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. We were alone in the ballroom, surrounded by the oppressive silence of Ravenswood Manor. The whisper returned, this time more clearly. "You have been invited." I spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one in sight. My heart racing, I called out, "Who's here?" But only the creaking of old wooden floorboards and the distant rumble of thunder replied. And then, like a ghostly apparition, a figure materialized before us. She was a woman with porcelain skin and jet black hair, dressed in a tattered white gown that seemed to shimmer in the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. Her eyes were sunken, her eyelids heavy with sorrow, but they sparkled with a malevolent intensity as she gazed upon us. "I have been waiting for you," she said, her voice like a sigh on the wind. "You should not have come here." She reached out a bony hand and beckoned us closer. Her fingers curled into a gesture that seemed to invite us to follow her into the depths of Ravenswood Manor's darkest secrets. As we followed the woman through the winding corridors, our footsteps echoed off the walls, making it feel as though we were being herded toward some unknown fate. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and rot, and I could feel a malevolent presence closing in around us. We eventually arrived at the entrance hall, a grand space with a sweeping staircase that seemed to curve like a ghostly tendril. The woman led us to the center of the room, where a chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As we stood there, I felt a creeping sense of unease, as though something was watching us from the darkness. The woman's eyes seemed to gleam with a knowing light, as if she could see into my very soul. She beckoned us closer, her hand extended in a gesture that seemed both inviting and repellent. I hesitated, feeling a shiver run down my spine, but my friends seemed entranced by the woman's presence. They moved forward, their faces filled with a mixture of fascination and fear. As they drew nearer, the woman reached out and touched each of them in turn, her fingers brushing against their skin like ice. I felt a surge of revulsion, but it was too late to stop them now. The woman's touch seemed to awaken some deep-seated emotion within each of my friends, and their eyes grew glassy and unfocused. They began to whisper, their voices barely audible over the sound of the wind outside. "We should not have come here," one of them said, her voice trembling with fear. "It's a place where souls go to die." As they spoke, their words seemed to take on a life of their own, echoing off the walls like a death knell. The woman's eyes glinted with amusement, as though she knew some terrible secret that we could never begin to understand. And then, without warning, her form began to shift and contort, her body elongating like rubber in ways that seemed impossible for human flesh. Her face stretched into a grotesque parody of its former self, her eyes bulging from their sockets like ripe fruit. As I watched in horror, the woman's body seemed to melt away like wax in a furnace, leaving behind only a faint scent of decay and corruption. My friends stumbled backward, their eyes vacant and unseeing, as though they had been possessed by some dark force. The woman's transformation was over, but its aftermath remained. I felt a sense of disorientation wash over me, as if I had stumbled into a world that was not my own. The woman's gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. It was then that she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Find it," she said, her words echoing off the walls like a command. "Find the diary." And with that, she vanished into thin air, leaving me alone and disoriented in the entrance hall. I stumbled forward, my heart racing with fear, as I searched for some clue as to what she had meant. That was when I saw it, a small, leather-bound book hidden away on a dusty shelf. It was old and worn, its cover cracked and faded with age, but something about it drew me in, like a moth to flame. I opened the book, and as I did, I felt a sudden rush of memories flood my mind. They were not my own, but rather those of a girl who had lived in Ravenswood Manor many years ago. The diary belonged to her, and its pages told the story of a life that was marked by tragedy and despair. As I read on, I discovered that she had been a patient at a nearby asylum, and that the woman who now haunted the manor had been one of her doctors. But it was not just any doctor. It was Dr. Emily Ravenswood, a brilliant but twisted mind who had conducted experiments on her patients in an attempt to unlock the secrets of the human psyche. And as I read on, I realized that my friends were not what they seemed. They were also patients at the asylum, and their memories were false, implanted by Dr. Ravenswood herself. The woman's words echoed in my mind, "Find it," and I knew that I had to escape from the manor before it was too late. As I delved deeper into the diary, I began to feel a presence around me. The air grew thick with an eerie, unsettling energy that seemed to seep from the very walls themselves. It was as if the manor was alive, and it was watching me. I tried to focus on the words on the page, but my eyes kept drifting back to the surrounding environment. The shadows cast by the flickering candles seemed to twist and writhe on the walls, like living things. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every groan of the old wooden beams sent a shiver down my spine. I felt like I was being herded toward some unknown fate with no escape in sight. My friends, still under the influence of Dr. Ravenswood's experiments, seemed to be losing their grip on reality. They wandered around me, muttering to themselves, their eyes glassy and unfocused. "What's going on?" one of them asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my own fear in check. "But we need to get out of here." But it was too late. The whispers had begun. At first they were just faint murmurs, barely audible over the creaking of the floorboards. But soon they grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing off the walls and ceiling. "Get out while you still can," the whispers seemed to say. "Don't trust anyone." I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voices, but there was no one in sight. The whispers grew louder still, until they were almost deafening. It was as if the very walls themselves were warning me away from some terrible truth. As I delved deeper into the diary, I began to feel a sense of unease. The whispers in the walls had grown louder, more insistent, and I knew that I had to find a way out of Ravenswood Manor. But where could I go? The doors seemed to lead only to more corridors, more rooms filled with secrets and lies. It was as if the manor itself was designed to keep me trapped. And then I saw it, a small door hidden behind a tattered tapestry. It was almost invisible, but I knew that I had to find it. I pushed the tapestry aside, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairway that plunged into darkness. My heart racing, I took the stairs two at a time, my hands outstretched in front of me like a blind person feeling their way through the dark. The air grew colder with every step, and I could feel a malevolent presence lurking just out of sight. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. It was filled with strange objects, ancient artifacts, dusty tomes, and strange devices that I couldn't even begin to understand. In the center of the room, I saw a single chair, bolted to the floor as if it were a part of the very foundation of the manor itself. And then I heard the noises. At first, they were just faint whispers, but soon they grew louder, more insistent. It was as if someone or something was trying to communicate with me. But who or what? I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voices, but there was no one in sight. The noises grew louder still, until they were almost deafening. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. The silence was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. I knew that I had to get out of there, to find a way back to the safety of the outside world. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. As I turned to leave the hidden room, my eyes fell upon a portrait hanging on the wall. It was an old painting of a woman with piercing green eyes, her skin as pale as alabaster. She wore a gown that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her presence seemed to command attention. But what caught my attention was not just the woman herself, but the fact that she seemed to be looking right through me. Her gaze was unnervingly intense, as if she could see into my very soul. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I gazed at the portrait, and suddenly I knew that I was not alone in the room. The air grew thick with an unseen presence, one that seemed to be watching me from just beyond the edge of perception. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept drifting back to the portrait, drawn by some morbid fascination. The woman's gaze seemed to hold a secret, one that only she knew. And as I stood there, transfixed by her gaze, I felt a creeping sense of dread. Something was not right in this room, something that threatened to consume me whole. I tried to take a step back, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The woman's eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire, and I knew that I was in grave danger. Suddenly, the portrait seemed to ripple, as if it were alive. And then, in an instant, everything went black. As I regained consciousness, I found myself in the same room as before, but everything seemed different. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, and I could feel eyes upon me once again. It was then that I noticed a small, ornate box on the nearby table. It was adorned with strange symbols and markings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Suddenly, it opened by itself, revealing a family heirloom that made my blood run cold. Inside the box lay a locket with two photographs, one of myself as a child and another of the woman from the portrait. But what shocked me was not just the resemblance between us, but the fact that she was holding my hand in both photographs. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with questions. Who was this woman? And why did she seem to be connected to me? The room began to spin around me as I tried to make sense of the bizarre discovery. Suddenly, the portrait on the wall seemed to change, its eyes now fixed upon me with an unnerving intensity. I knew then that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, a dark history that threatened to consume me whole. The woman's presence seemed to grow stronger still, and I could feel her breathing down my neck. It was as if she was trying to tell me something, but in a language I couldn't understand. I knew then that I had to escape from Ravenswood Manor before it was too late. As night began to fall, I knew that I had to make a decision. I couldn't stay in Ravenswood Manor any longer, not now that I had uncovered its dark secrets. But where could I go? The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows like a living thing, making me feel trapped and vulnerable. I knew that I had to get out of there, but my legs felt heavy and uncooperative. It was as if they were rooted to the spot, refusing to move. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that I was being irrational. But deep down, I knew that I was playing with fire. The woman's eyes seemed to be watching me from the shadows, her presence growing stronger with every passing moment. I could feel her breath on the back of my neck, making the hairs stand on end. Suddenly, a loud creaking sound echoed through the hallway, making me jump. It sounded like someone was coming for me. My heart racing, I tried to move, but my legs were frozen in place. The creaking grew louder, closer, and then stopped abruptly. There was an oppressive silence that followed, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. And then, a faint whisper seemed to caress my ear. "You should have stayed inside." I spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to come from all directions at once, making my skin crawl with fear. I knew then that I had to get out of there before it was too late. As I frantically searched for a way out of Ravenswood Manor, the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, like grasping fingers. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they became a cacophony of sound that threatened to consume me whole. I stumbled through the corridors, my mind reeling with questions and fears. What secrets did Ravenswood Manor hold? And what lay at its heart? The answers seemed to slip further away from me with every step. I began to wonder if I had ever truly known the truth about myself, or if it was all just a carefully constructed web of lies. The portrait on the wall seemed to be watching me, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. I felt like I was being pulled into its gaze, sucked down into a vortex of madness and despair. And then, in a flash of insight, I understood. Ravenswood Manor was not just a house. It was a prison, a trap designed to keep secrets buried forever. But what secrets, and who was behind them? The questions swirled around me like a maelstrom, leaving me gasping for air. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. A door, hidden behind a tattered curtain of cobwebs. It seemed to pulsate with an otherworldly energy, as if it was alive and waiting for me. With a sense of inevitability, I pushed open the door and stepped through into the unknown. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I was consumed by an eternal silence. The last thing I remember is the sound of my own screams, echoing through the void like a distant whisper. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with an eerie presence, and I could feel eyes upon me. Suddenly, a faint light appeared before me, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It grew brighter, illuminating a room filled with ancient artifacts and forbidden knowledge. In the center of the room, a figure waited for me, the woman from the portrait. Her eyes blazed with an otherworldly intensity, and her presence seemed to fill the air with an unspeakable horror. I knew then that I had to confront my deepest fears, to face the darkness within myself. The woman reached out a hand, beckoning me closer. With a sense of inevitability, I took a step forward, into the heart of madness. As I did, the world around me began to distort and twist, like a reflection in rippling water. The woman's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, revealing secrets that I had long suppressed. I saw visions of childhood traumas, of lost loved ones, of unspeakable horrors that lurked within the shadows. The woman's presence was a catalyst, unleashing a maelstrom of emotions and memories that threatened to consume me whole. And yet, even as I was torn apart by my own fears, I felt a sense of liberation, a release from the shackles of sanity. I knew then that I had to let go, to surrender to the horror within. The woman's eyes seemed to burn brighter, filling me with an unspeakable power. And in that moment, I knew that I was no longer myself, that I had become something more, something ancient and evil. The world around me dissolved into chaos, and I was left standing alone, a vessel for the horror within. As I stood there, bathed in the woman's eerie glow, I knew that I had finally found the truth. Ravenswood Manor was a nexus of dark energies, a conduit for the horrors that lurked within the shadows. The portrait, the locket, the whispers, all were part of a sinister design to ensnare the innocent and consume their souls. And I, dear reader, was no exception. The woman's eyes seemed to bore into my very soul, revealing the darkest corners of my own heart. I saw the depths of my own madness, the horrors that I had long suppressed. And in that moment, I knew that I was doomed. The world around me dissolved into chaos, and I felt myself being pulled apart by the sheer force of the darkness within. The woman's laughter echoed through the halls, a cold, mirthless sound that seemed to freeze my very blood. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was back in my own bed, surrounded by the familiar comforts of home. But something was wrong. The air felt heavy with an unseen presence, and I could sense the weight of Ravenswood Manor's darkness still lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I knew then that I had been forever changed, that a part of me had been left behind in that forsaken place. And as I lay there, frozen with fear, I heard the whispers once more, a soft, raspy voice whispering a single word in my ear: "Welcome home." The darkness closed in around me, and I knew that I was forever trapped in its grasp.